I was telling, good morning, Ursula. Thank you so much for being here. When I walked in, I was telling some of my colleagues I didn't sleep well last night because I had a dream that instead of all of you in the audience, it was all of my high school friends with their, wait, this is true story, as I told Allison, with their toddlers. Maybe this is because I have a toddler. And they were running up on stage and interrupting me the entire time. So I think this is going to go better than that.
You need to drink some wine at night.
I do need some more wine at night. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Jeff Zucker, for the wonderful invitation. And thank you to CNN for supporting this initiative. From the moment we started it about a year ago, it has meant a great deal to me, and we hope it has an impact far outside of New York City. Thank you, Ursula, for being here.
I am thrilled.
Good.
I'm thrilled. The audience is
It's a good
big.
group.
It's
Huh?
a good group.
It's
Yeah.
a good group.
Thank you for being here.
So we're going to talk about your personal story, your remarkable rise, and we're going to talk about what Jeff brought up, which is the American dream. Is it alive today, and what can we all do with our voices to help make sure it is achievable for more people? So let's start with all of the firsts that you've achieved. The first African-American female CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and the first woman to succeed another woman as the head of a Fortune 500 company. But when you were a child, a lot of people told you, no way, Ursula, you have 3 strikes against you. What were those?
Yeah, I actually heard those words. You have 3 strikes against you. It's really kind of a strange thing to say to a kid. Very inspiring. But when I was about 13, it was the first time I heard it. And the person said, you're pretty smart, but you have some challenges. What are they? You have 3 strikes against you. You're poor, you're a woman, and you're black. And you just hear that and it kind of goes away. And then later I heard it again, maybe when I was 17 or 18 years old. And I realized that it really troubled me for all of this time. And the reason why it troubled me is that 2 of these strikes are who you are. You were placed on the earth as a black woman, and they say, well, this is a problem. And for me, it was a motivator only after I kind of internalized the challenge that they had placed in front of me, which is one of bigotry, one of preconceptions, one of words not mattering, so not understanding the impact of words on an individual, and having to figure out a way to find my place with that as the foundation that these people had laid for me.
So your mom, like all the moms and dads out there, was a big part of this. I think we're looking, this is little
Me.
Ursula.
Oh my God.
I mean, you've talked about where you grew up.
Look at that. Isn't that cute? Yes, my mother.
There's your mom, and you grew up in public housing on Manhattan's Lower East Side, 2 bedrooms, 4 people, and you called it the real gradation of poor. But it's your mom who told you over and over again, where you are is not who you are.
Yeah, I grew up in the best environment possible. And I mean possible across all gradations. The physical environment was very, very, very challenging. Even though when you walked into my apartment, our apartment, it was great. Inside of my mother was very organized. She was I called her maniacal about rules and organization and cleanliness and demands. Because we were a lot of people in a very small space, and so the only way that you can keep yourself sane is to do this. By the way, this carries over into my life today. If you come to my apartment, which is nowhere near as small, I'm insane about organization and that kind of stuff, so I kind of inherited it. But outside of that apartment was insanity. I think about it now, and when I was growing up, it wasn't that big a deal because we were there. You're kind of in it. Yeah. But when I think back on it, it was crazy. I mean, we had drug people in the hallways, dealers and addicts.
In the
hallways. I mean, yeah, that was pretty common in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. I grew up, first was in the tenements. And then we moved up to the projects, the housing projects in Baruch Drive, which was definitely, we had arrived by that time. And the neighborhood was a struggling neighborhood. The best thing about the neighborhood were the people. The physical infrastructure was a disaster. It was a disaster. But the people in the neighborhood were all of the same kind. We were poor, parents trying hard to protect their kids and give them a good foundation for the future. Every single person. We were raised, my brother, my sister, and I, by the neighborhood. We literally, if we walked to school, I had to walk from where I lived to my grade school, which was on 3rd Street and Avenue D, and I was on Baruch Drive, so it was a ways away.
Yeah.
Not that long, but let's say a half a mile. My mother would be able to watch us through these little opera glasses from the fire escape. And if my brother or my sister or I took a deviation at all in the process, by the time we got home from school, so this is in the morning, 10 people in the neighborhood had hit us over the head because they were watching us on the way to school and watching us on the way home. That's kind of broken down, unfortunately, in America today, largely in America today. But when I was growing up, we did have It Takes a Village. It was a very, very poor village, but it was a good one that watched us.
So also critical in your development, your mother, obviously, and your high school, Cathedral High School. And I just want to note, we have some girls right over at the second table to my left here from Cathedral High School, including their principal. There they are. And some girls as well from Dalton as well. And we'll talk about them in a little bit, but we're glad that they can be here. So while you were at school, your guidance counselor, Sister Rosemary, said to you, Ursula, you can become a nurse, you can become a teacher, or you can become a nun. And your reaction was?
None was out of the question. It really was. I didn't quite know what a nun entailed totally, but I did know the parts that I didn't know. I didn't think I would like too much. And they seemed like good careers. I didn't revolt or think it was demeaning at all. It just didn't seem, they seemed like they were fine, but they didn't seem to really kind of get me too much. They didn't get my heart or my soul. And so in our school, it's very different now, right? When I went to high school, literally to do research, you went to the library and you got a book out. There was no way to do searches online. You had to kind of go and you had to kind of know what you were looking for, kind of generally. Today, it's a lot different, right?
By the way, it was like that for me in elementary
school too?
too.
Yeah, it's amazing how much it's changed in a very short amount of time, right? But so I took a test called the PSAT, the preliminary SAT test, when I was, I don't know, 9th grade, 10th grade, whatever you take them. And I did surprisingly well in mathematics. It was surprisingly well for the environment that I was in. Obviously, when I found out later, it was not that great from the external environment, but it was really surprisingly well based on what I had been taught. And I had a lay teacher who said to me, by the way, you should look at some other things. You're good at math. Maybe you should look at some other areas that you could apply it. And she said, go to the library and look at the Barron's book.
Look at the Barron's book.
The Barron's book of colleges and careers, right?
Okay.
And I did. I went to the Barron's book, and I knew at this point that my mother, that we had a really good life. It was very difficult financially, but it was really good. But my mother was really struggling financially. I could just imagine to get food on the table every day and rent paid, and we got, public assistance, cleaning offices, whatever we could to get food and a semblance of, what we would take for granted today, a reasonable life. I decided that I had to, and college was not an option. It was, meaning you could not go. You had to go, or college was the only option in our family. You'd be disowned if you didn't go to college. And I remember saying to my mother, how the heck are we going to pay for that? She said, that's my responsibility. You just do the grades. I'll take care of the cost. It turns out she didn't, and I'll talk about that. She did, but through the help of a lot of things that are being wiped out today. So I went to the Barron's book, and I decided 4 years of college. That's the most I could do. And I have to find a career that pays the most money after 4 years of college. That was it. So I literally went to the book, opened up the book, looked at the most competitive colleges. I don't know what did I think. I could get into those colleges, right? And nobody told me I couldn't at that point. And I looked at the career that made the most money after 4 years of college. And in 1976, that was chemical engineering. So that was it.
I read $29,004.
$29,004 was what I made when I graduated from college and took a job, and graduate school, and took a job with Xerox. $29,004. And I will always remember that sum of money because it was spectacular. I mean, just think about $29,000. But by the way, then
More than I made in my first job in
but
journalism.
I had an engineering degree. An engineering degree I did get.
There you
yeah.
go.
And I didn't study chemical engineering we're not going to get into that too much. I actually switched to mechanical engineering because I was so bad at chemistry. So.
You've talked about feeling as a female engineer in America alone and odd. Those are your words. And that you were very comfortable with that.
Yeah, yeah. In college, I was studying engineering, and I went to Brooklyn Poly, which is now called the Polytechnic University of NYU, or Polytechnic Engineering School of NYU. I'm not really sure how we've renamed it. There were very few women, and there were very few black people in the school, and there were very few black women. So I came from an all-girl Catholic high school, and went to this literally all-male, fairly Jewish college. And I was a minority. And it didn't really mean a lot to me at that point because I was very used to, by the time I got to work, I was very used to being around a whole bunch of men who were fairly uncomfortable with difference. And it was an interesting statement. This is my words now, not my words then. It was a position of power in a lot of ways.
For you?
For me. Because one of the things I was very comfortable with was them. They were not very comfortable with me. And it's something I actually tell women about all the time now. I say, you got to pay attention to where you are really, right? When you walk into a business meeting and there are no women, the first reaction is, oh my God, I'm the only one, and I'm a lower. I'm like, no, I'm the only one. Imagine all these guys, they have no clue.
And I'm going to run the
place,
company one day.
Because they don't have a clue how to really deal with you in general, particularly technical women. And you can kind of wallow behind that as not having role models, which we don't have, and et cetera. I actually started to feel relatively comfortable with the fact that they were relatively awkward.
So we're going to talk in a moment about if that persists today, because I think it does to some extent. But before we do, a little music for you. Let's play a video clip of you going back to Cathedral High School, meeting with some of these kids who are here today.
Oh, I didn't know you were going to do this.
Of course, some surprises. Because that had such an impact on your trajectory. Let's play that.
It is my honor to introduce to you Miss Ursula Burns.
When alumni come back, it's a motivation. It's a peek into my own future. It's about the connection you're making. It's like a sisterhood, honestly.
It took a while for me to understand the power of example from me to others. So coming back was very fulfilling and rewarding to see that we're still here and still going strong. I'm considered a successful woman, and people say, well, you worked really hard and you did. And I know very, very well, very clearly that I came to Cathedral, I went to my college, I went to my graduate school, all because somebody helped. All of it because somebody helped.
We were always late with tuition. I mean, we were late, we missed months, we did everything you could imagine, yeah. And the school actually didn't kick me out.
Everybody gave me a hand. People gave me a hand.
And what stood out to me when I watched that, because somebody helped. And we talk about the American dream that was so alive for you, Ursula. It was so alive, despite your environment, despite what you were dealing with. And you had people who helped, whether it was those people you told us about in your community or these folks at Cathedral. Is that American dream as alive today, enough alive today, and are enough people helping?
I think it is as alive today. I don't necessarily think that enough people are helping. And you know, I think a lot about this question because my entire existence was foundationed on three principles. One is that my mother believed that her primary responsibility, almost her only responsibility, were her three kids. All other things were secondary to that. And she prioritized her time, all of the money, the little bit of money that she had, all of the energies that she had around assuring that my brother, my sister, and I had a strong foundation. She reached out to wherever she could get help, and she was not too proud to beg at all, and definitely not too proud to work. The second thing that was clear is that early on, that without other people helping us, my mother's best efforts would have not been enough. So I was talking about this. I went to grade school, and grade school was, what, $20 a month, $20 a month. And high school was $65 a month. I remember this very specifically. My mother's highest income, that was when she died at the age of 49, was $4,400 a year.
How old were you when she died?
25.
Okay.
I said that without crying, which is very good because I'm on TV. $4,400 a year, and when I was in high school, it was less than that. It was a lot less than that. And the way that we got through high school was that the school, my mother was always late for something, right? She had to be late for either rent or something, I mean, tuition, et cetera. The school was reasonable. You know, obviously, we couldn't go there for free. I couldn't go there for free. But if we didn't have it that month, it just, you know, it was okay. And they would work it out with my mother. It was a lot more stressful on her than it was on me. But so when I went to college, when it came time for me to go to college, to apply to schools where the applications were $60.
Yeah.
Somewhere, remember this?
A lot. Yes.
I mean, I applied to 7 colleges. There's no way in the world I could afford to apply. That's like, that's, you know, half my mother's salary. But there were programs funded by some rich people from the city, from the state, from the federal government that allowed you at certain income levels to waive the application fees. When I went to college, when I got into colleges, I was really stressed because we didn't have, these things were tens of thousands of dollars a year. And there were programs from states, city, rich people who donated money to actually allow me to go to school. And so all of this was help. The reason, back to the American dream, for me the American dream was, the way that I lived it was, you do your part. And knowing that not everybody starts out at an equal level, we'll do as much as we can to give you a good start.
Society will help.
Society will
pick up
help
the rest.
take care of it, give you a good start.
So
It's changing now.
So what's wrong with it today,
Well,
Ursula?
today there's a lot of, language really matters a lot, and particularly language of leaders. And I never, this is back to the 3 strikes thing, how it sticks in the back of your mind without even knowing it, how much of a headwind it is for you without even knowing it. The rhetoric today, in general, is about the following. If you don't have, you don't deserve to have. If you don't have, you didn't try hard enough. If you don't have, your group didn't help you enough. There's so much that's back to the individual, not recognizing, not realizing. There's some of that, I'm sure, that if you don't have, you don't deserve to have. I'm sure that there's some of that. The vast majority of people who don't have a good start. And don't have a good start, don't have enough money, simple things. Like my mother was an immigrant. My mother and father were immigrants to this country. My father left. My mother was an immigrant. I mean, she spoke English, great. She had a high school diploma, great, but she had no foundation whatsoever to get a job outside of cleaning houses. And by this time, she had 3 children. So bodies, institutions, government, institutions both private and public, had to help her. And her responsibility was to take that help and parlay it into something else. That's the American dream, right? And we are today, I think, structurally tearing apart the foundation of these helps. Yeah, to me, it's amazing.
Tearing apart the foundation.
Right, we're removing it. And there may be good reasons to do that financially in the short term. It is, to me, one of the most dumb decisions in the long term.
Have you been to the White House in the last 6 months?
Absolutely not.
So, if you were invited, because a number of tech CEOs, as you know, have gone and been invited, sat with the president, would you go? What would you say, Ursula?
My message to the White House, any administration, is the same. And it is the same because this is not a political issue. We've made it a political issue. This is a human issue. This is a long-term America issue. My message, Democrat, Republican, Obama, Trump, has been and would be that people need people need structures in society that enable them to do better in the future. One of the major things that government has to do is that. So what are those structures? Education, a foundation in education, which today is defined almost totally by income and geography, which is the most amazing thing in the world. When I was growing up, we went to Most Holy Redeemer. My mother was Catholic. That made it easy. The Most Holy Redeemer was my grade school and Cathedral my high school. But even if we weren't Catholic, we would have gone to that school. A lot of kids in the school in Most Holy Redeemer were Jewish because it was the safest, best school in the neighborhood. The public schools were not adequate enough for my mother to assure. So, and by the way, we're now 40 years later, and guess what? We're about in the same place. Yeah. So education, healthcare. To have a debate about whether or not you can get glasses if you need them is one of the most bizarre debates in the world. Money should not be the foundation of those decisions, and that's what, and definitely not class shouldn't be the foundation of those decisions, but that's what they are today, right? We also want a safe environment to live in. Obviously, imagine if you had to go home and listen to a whole bunch of rancor and not be safe. So these are things that are foundational, and I say this to anyone who's in power, that's what we pay taxes for. Yeah. That's what the responsibility of government is. That's what the responsibility of people who have are as well. And it's the responsibility of corporations. We have to come together not to give, we don't have, I love this idea of giving back. Back, who's back? We have to give aside, we're all the same. Forward, you have to give somewhere, but it's not back, right? We have to give forward. So I actually would say the same thing. If I were invited, I would go. Okay. But I'm not the CEO anymore, so I'm hoping like heck I don't get invited.
You're still pretty important.
But there's a different, the issues I have today are a little bit about language, and or a lot about language, and a little bit about what I think is behind the language, which I'm hoping is not true.
So we have some incredible people in the audience, and I can't name them all, but you know, we have folks from the Robin Hood Foundation here who do so much to alleviate poverty here in New York City, from the Boys and Girls Club here, including Stan King back there, who runs the club.
And go Robin Hood, I know Robin Hood as well. I was with Wes Moore this weekend, yeah. It's pretty cool, yeah.
And he's incredible, the new CEO. Yeah. And these are people that are doing so much more than their part. So much more than I'm doing every day, so much more than a lot of us are doing every day. So there's the question of what more we can all do. And then there's the question of, well, at what point does it take leaders like you, who have just stepped down from leading these big companies, to jump into the ring, into politics, and affect change? And CEO after CEO that I ask says no.
This one, add another one to it.
But, it's funny.
I'll get to it. I'll get there.
To an extent, but why? Why?
I mean, look at so I will never say never, even though right now I'm saying never on this stage. Because if I don't say never, it starts this whole other thing. It has
happened before, and those nevers have turned into I'm running.
Right. First of all, what can we do more? It's more. One of the things that I learned early, there's a gentleman who runs a school in Baltimore called University of Maryland, Baltimore County. His name is Dr. Freeman Herbowski. He's responsible for graduating more African-American college students who go on to get their PhD than any school in the United States. This is a little school in Baltimore County. He's a black man. He's an amazing guy. You know, got his PhD when he was like 18. He's one of these kind of savants. But he taught me a while ago and said, basically, and he did the one, you know, save a penny every day, save a penny and then double it. And by the end of a really short amount of time, I don't know how long it is, but you can do the math, you're a millionaire. And he said we should do that with people. So get a person and own that person. Yes, who's just one. That person gets a person and owns that person. One of the things that we're trying to do with my kids is to make their situation a privilege for them, to make them aware of the fact that they are unbelievably privileged. And while I wasn't and my husband wasn't, all we needed was a couple of people to help us, and we turned that into this great American life, right? So if these are 2 kids, 23 and 27, they should have a person. 2, if they can have them, literally, that person is their brother or sister. And they take care of them, They basically partner with them and drag them along. And we've gotten to the point where we say, well, Bill Gates gives billions and billions of dollars, by the way, he does, and we can't ever match that, so why should we help? What we have to do is what we can do. And what we can do, by the way, he's phenomenal. Bill, and when you understand some of the stuff that he's doing, it's just...
And Melinda.
And Melinda,
A lot on
yeah,
women.
together, Bill and Melinda are just amazing, and they're just... But we don't have to be Bill and Melinda to actually have as much impact on an individual. Actually, we can actually have more impact on an individual by actually getting to know them. You go to the school and say, hey, my name is whoever you are, and you know, I go to Dalton, you're in the 5th grade in whatever, PS 151, and you're gonna be my friend. We're gonna hang out. And we're gonna hang out, we're gonna come to my house, we're gonna go to movies, we're gonna do homework together, you're gonna teach me some things, I'm gonna teach you some things, and we can actually globalize that individual, make them a little bit better. And we can all do it. That is the requirement, that's what I do. That's why I spend a lot of time with kids, right? With kids, they're teenagers, kids. Now, why not politics? If I thought that the effort that I put into the political arena was an effort that would have more impact, equal to or more impact than the effort I do today, I would do it. I am a real believer that it will not. And I know that part of it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing, right? So if you don't get involved, you can't have it have more impact, so on and so on. But I think if I did that, I wouldn't be able to do most of the things that I'm passionate about doing now.
I think, okay, then where does that leave my 15-month-old daughter, right, when she's older? Where does that?
I do understand. And I actually am one of the few people who, let me take out one of the few people. I actually feel badly about that. Okay. Right? I really do, because it's like, could I do this? If you could transport me into the role, I would actually feel better about taking it than if I had to run. And it's not the running part that I'm fairly competitive, but it's such BS right now that we go through to run, just to run. I just need to get, if you want somebody to actually do a job, I think I would be a reasonable person to do certain kind of work. But before I can even walk in the door, there's this other stuff that you have to do, which is ridiculous. You know, that you have to kind of know more about me than my husband knows about me. I have to be more saintly than Jesus Christ was.
And we know you're not a nun.
And I'm not a nun.
Yeah.
And
that we know.
My husband knows me pretty well. So I don't want, and then when you get there, a lot of it is not about constructive dialogue. It's about, particularly now, it's about actually not even dialogue. It's just about, so I do understand that I'm copping out a bit by saying, not me now, and I feel guilty about that. This is what Cathedral did to me, thank you very much. The guilt.
Catholic guilt.
And the Catholic guilt. I may actually have to change my mind at some point, but I think that we need to do a little bit more structural repair of the political system before I get involved.
I appreciate the candor. I'd also appreciate it if when you do decide to run, you come back and you can say it on CNN and let us know. All right, so let's talk about business. And my colleague Lori Siegel and the CNN Money team just did this fantastic series on sexism in Silicon Valley and what's going on right now. And even though you're not in Silicon Valley, this is an issue across corporate America. And you said recently, structurally, business is still made for men.
Yep.
Still?
Absolutely.
Why?
Generally, it's because it's run by men still. And they don't have a clue what structurally made for women is about. And they are generally not, I'm going to get tons of crap on this, but I'm going to say it anyway. They generally don't give a hoot. And
Men don't give a hoot?
Yeah, about the structural changes needed. They care about women, but we're asking them to do some pretty hard things here. And I'm going to give you an example of this that's also going to get me in trouble, but I don't care right now. We have this the women's health discussion that's happening in Washington, the health discussion in the women part of it. So they call people who would be important to listen, the president called people who would be important to listen to come in and talk about it. So somebody had a camera watching the people as they left the meeting. was really interesting to realize that there was not one woman in the meeting talking about women's health issues. And this is part of the problem with business as well sometimes, is that there is a lack of a clear voice, clear understanding and a clear voice in the room about what's actually happening. And I think it's kind of funny right now that we're all aghast. And, oh my God, can you see what's happening in Silicon Valley? Can you see what's happening in these crazy companies? My question would be, look at the people largely who are running them and ask what their backgrounds are. Where have they lived and existed? How have they ever had to deal with a lot of difference? And without a structure around them, without them getting a structure around them, a board around them, some management team around them that can bring difference to the table, it's hard for them to see it. It would be like all Catholics designing a structure for Jewish people. We just don't understand it enough, right? We're not just not close. I would assume if all the Catholics were doing this, we would get some Jewish people in the room to say, okay, you got to separate this from this, and then we wouldn't know that naturally. It wouldn't be in our soul. And I think it's the same way now with business.
So how do you fix it?
Hire the people.
But it's
Hire the people.
ridiculous that I think it's like 19 or 20 Fortune 500 companies have female CEOs.
Yeah, I'm not even talking about CEOs, by the way. I love the idea of CEOs. But there are a whole lot of jobs outside of the 500 CEO jobs.
Raise them up.
Raise them all up. And by the way, hire them. Hire the people at all levels.
So things like the Rooney Rule, for example, in the NFL.
We have it called the Wilson Rule. We're pretty famous for it in business, Xerox. The Wilson Rule.
Having X amount of women, make sure you interview them for every
right.
sort of key
and,
position.
you know, we learned Xerox is really good. Xerox, I retired, but I still obviously still love it. I'm still heavily invested in it as well, which is one of the reasons why I love it. We did this thing, and we are a very good company from a diversity standpoint. We're definitely one of the leading companies out there. And we found, this is a black female CEO. At that time we had a woman CFO, the head of research was a woman. So we're rocking and rolling on diversity. We're saying, yeah, we're pretty good. We knew we had a long way to go, a long way to 50%, which would be reasonable. Right. And so we actually put in place this thing called the Wilson Rule.
Okay.
And the Wilson Rule is the Rooney Rule for business. So for every role, now this is not easy to do, and we've messed it up 1,000 times, so we're not perfect at it. And for every role, you have to have 3 great candidates, at least 3 great candidates, and there must be diversity in that candidate pool. Mm-hmm. And then you find out, okay, people are smart. So they get 3 great candidates, and of course, they don't ever hire so you got to keep iterating the rule to get around human nature's ability to actually outsmart rules, right? And just keep pushing and pushing and pushing.
It wasn't always like that. I read a story about back 1989, right? Long time ago. You're at the company. You challenged in some meeting an executive VP. Someone stood up and said, why all this focus on diversity? Like, we're fine. And I read that you stood up in front of everyone, chided this executive VP for displaying a lack of passion and principles.
Yeah, and it was...
This, by the way, early days.
Yeah, that's me. Wow. Look at that.
We do our digging.
You do your digging, my goodness. And this is in Japan. We're in Tokyo. See, it's Fuji Xerox. Yeah, this is me in Japan leading a team. Look at the hair. Wow. And the glasses, leading a team. That was short. In those days, that was short. I used to have hair that was that big. This individual who's a very good friend and an amazing leader, long retired, and became one of my biggest sponsors and one of my best friends from a business perspective, but also in personal life. He was trying hard to do the right thing. So the person actually didn't say, why all this diversity? He said, because we didn't have the word diversity then. It was affirmative action, remember?
Okay.
Why all this affirmative action? We're getting all these women and Spanish people, he said. Spanish people. They're Puerto Ricans, I thought of Mexicans, but Spanish people. And these black people in the company. Why are we doing this? He thinks it's making it more complicated and it's lowering the standards. And the person, and I know the person who said it actually became a colleague as well, stayed in the company. And he responded in a very organized, very respectful way. And went through the whole thing, this is what we're doing, and these are the numbers and so on. And I was angry at this individual and more angry at him because he answered it almost like a math equation, without a level of how dare you How dare you, you know.
Formulaic.
Yeah, he was more trained at answering the question than I was. So I stood up and said to him, I'm angry at this guy, I know his name was Gerald, but I'm really upset at you. And he's like, why? I thought I did the right thing. I said, because you answered a stupid question. An ignorant question asked by a word my mother said I should never say by a stupid individual. And you gave it credence. And he shot me down, this executive just killed me. And rightfully so. He said there's a time and a place for everything, and you gotta be more respectful. But then we became great friends. Wow. Great friends, because he would call me to my office. I didn't even know who he was, actually, at the time. My now husband said, do you know who that was? I said, some guy, I don't know. He says, well, he's the executive vice president of the company. He runs half the company. And I said, well, this is the problem. He said, well, all you're going to have, this is my husband, all you have to do is look for another job. It's not going to be that hard. And this guy, Waylon Hicks was his name, actually didn't do that at all. He called me to his office, and a little while later, and I would go to his office often to just debate issues and talk. And it was the first time that I met, at that point, a Republican, Midwestern, conservative person that I didn't even know I didn't resonate with those people, but I resonated with him on many things and liked him. And it was my first foray into political diversity. I wish we can get back into that now, a little bit more constructive.
I had read, and it stunned me so much that I wanted to fact check it live right here, that you did not feel discrimination because of your race on the way up.
It was really strange in our company. And part of it, I picked the perfect place for me at a perfect time and place for the company. So I was actually welcomed in Xerox with open arms for who I was. They were like, yeah, I mean, they didn't give a hoot about how I dressed or how I spoke. They thought I was a really sharp engineer. And we have a long history started by this guy named Joseph Wilson, who started this company in Rochester, New York, and decided at the race riots in Rochester, some of the worst riots in Rochester in the 60s, that he could not sit in this company and just see it happen. So he actually reached out. My husband was a product of Joe Wilson. My husband is 20 years older than I am. He's a retired physicist at Xerox. And he was one of these people that they hired. They went out and said, give me some black people to come in and work at the company. And my husband, by the way, he was a talented, skilled, degreed person. And he started this. So the company has this, our company has this personality that was a perfect fit for my personality. Clearly there were prejudices about my race and about my gender for sure, but the people were tuned and trained enough in Xerox to not be stupid enough to bring that up, because I don't believe everybody was an angel. They were very concerned about my age. It was really amazing. Everywhere I went, I heard.
You were too young?
I was too young. You're too young. How are you doing this? You're too young. You're too young. You're too young. And I would, I had smart answers for all of that. It's an accident of birth. I have nothing to do with that. Those kind of things.
So because you bring up your husband, and then a little bit we're going to open it up for questions, so get them ready. Because you talk about your husband, I'll never forget Sheryl Sandberg before her husband Dave passed away, writing about how one of the most important, obviously personal decisions you can make in your life, but also business decisions for your career is who you marry. And I feel exactly the same way.
It is the #1 criteria for happiness or sadness and for success or failure.
And Ursula, you've been very candid about talking about your rise up, saying that in retrospect you have 2 children, that you wish you'd had more.
Yep.
You've also said, I hesitate to ask the question to female leaders, work-life balance, because I hate when people ask it to me because I don't think balance exists. But you have said, we have to talk about it more. And your husband, after he retired from Xerox, stayed at home and did a majority of the raising the kids at home while you were becoming CEO.
The majority, if it weren't for him, they would be foraging for food in the garbage cans.
Could you have done it? Could you have candidly done
No
it?
way, in no way.
If he hadn't
And let me tell you, so let me kind of knit it all together. Of course I would have been able to do it. When you have means, you can build a structure around you that looks like a family, right? Somebody to pick up the kid. You can build a structure. When I say no, we actually had children with the expectation, the desire, the requirement that we raised them. We wanted to actually, kind of have the tooling in place where we cook meals. And so we did not have live-in help. We moved to England. When we moved to England, we did. But that's because we didn't know what the hell we were doing. But when we came back home, we literally never had live-in help. So we'd have somebody who would come and clean occasionally, and whenever we had crazy things to do, we had a babysitter come in. I had a sister who was close by who could help. We had stepchildren who could help. My husband is 20 years older than I am. So there were a couple of things that came together. Let me knit it all together. First, you should find a great partner. A partner, man, woman, whatever it is, you have to find a great one. Or, as my mother would say, be alone. It's better to be, my mother would say to me all the time, you can do bad all by yourself. You do not need help. Right? And so if you're going to get a person who is not going to contribute to the positive forward movement of your life and family and et cetera, then don't get one.
Amen.
Right? And if you have one, just leave them behind. That's one. Second is that it would be great if you guys had a discussion about what kind of life you want to live. And what happens often is you kind of fall into this. My husband, fortunately, was 20 years older than I am, so he had already gone through the fall into it and kind of, got divorced. And he was now a little bit more purposeful about, so what do we want to do? How do we want to live?
Yeah.
And we had the second thing, that he was 20 years older than I am. So by the time I met him, he was halfway through his career. By the time I got a third of the way through my career, he was ready to retire. He'd been working at the company for 40 years by that time, so it was perfect. And so it turned out to have worked well. On the have more kids thing, which is a big mistake I made. There are a lot of mistakes that I made, but there are some that I actually regret.
And that's one?
One of them for sure, because I thought it was going to be really, really hard.
It is.
But once,
I don't know.
No, let me make sure you
what I'm
understand.
doing
Let me finish. The first one was really, really hard. The second one was really, really hard, but not exponentially harder than the first. Once you have the first one, the second one, then the third one, you got to have space for them, and you got to have means to take care of them. But I actually stopped too soon. My kids are such a joy. I mean, and I don't mean this like, they're all joy. They were pain in the rear end, all of the stuff that you can think of. But they are like pals of my husband and I. They're our backup. They call, they argue, they think, they call us clueless, but they are our backup on just about everything, and it is amazing to have. And I think that we did a reasonably good job. It's still, I was saying to Jeff earlier, the jury is still out. I think 45 is when you can declare success, because it takes a while. I mean, these kids, they kind of come back. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens. But right now, they're doing okay. And I have two nieces who are like my daughters as well. My brother's two kids, all in the same kind of cohort, and my granddaughter in the same kind of age, somewhere between 25 and 30, 22 and 30. And they're all part of the family. So since I wanted more, I just keep adopting all these nieces and nephews and granddaughters to do it. It would have been good.
Before we get to questions, just about women in tech and all that is the abysmal numbers. Computer science graduates has actually declined significantly from the 80s, which is nuts.
It is nuts.
There are not enough women at these high levels of these tech companies, and we're seeing some of the repercussions of that play out. You have some female aspiring engineers, I'm sure, sitting right over here from Cathedral and Dalton. What do you say to them about the world that is ahead, how they grab it, and your advice to the younger Ursula? What should they hear?
I think so I'm going to divide it into women and then women who are interested in tech. So let me do the women who are interested in tech. If you are anywhere near interested and have a reasonable level of aptitude, this is where I would run to. Companies realize that they need women in tech. So guess who they're trying to hire? Women in tech. It's literally go into tech. They will hire you and generally treat you well. Now, I'm going to get to that part of it because I do believe that this is a two-way street. So I think women in tech, we have built a set of norms in our society that say that women shouldn't, aren't great at this these sets of skills. It's the oddest thing in the world. It's kind of like saying that you can't read. Women can't read. Girls and women can do just about anything that a man can do. Maybe not as strong, but definitely more wily and more adaptable, or as wily and as adaptable. I think more, but so I think women in tech this is a time of power. You will get a job, you'll get paid well. You may not like the environment, and this is the second part. We are not victims here. We have something to say about the environment. If, this is not, they treat me badly. We have to actually own our position in the world and be strong and aggressive about it. And this is, when I speak to people, particularly in college, they ask me about this balance thing.
Yeah.
Work-life balance, I'm gonna have to, I don't know if I can figure it out, and so on, so on, so on. And I say, oh, interesting. So you have a husband yet? No, but I'm dating somebody, generally from the same school, generally in the same program. And I say, this is a conversation that we're gonna have for 5 more minutes, and then I'm gonna move on. Because you're the problem, it's not the guy who's the problem. How in the world can you and another intelligent MBA student from Harvard have a discussion that has it be your problem and not your together problem? We are falling victim to, by the way, this is a modern person. He's your age, right? I mean, he grew up he can go on the internet, he can drive a car, he can speak English. He probably has seen women teachers. And so why is it your burden to actually figure this out? You together should figure it out. You have to pick someone or train someone that you've picked to actually be a partner with you, not this, there's a set of norms, I'm gonna fall into the set of norms. And so the amount of times that this happens, Poppy, is amazing. Where women, I mean talented engineers, and they just fall in line. And they say, well, I'm gonna have to leave when the baby comes. By the way, there are certain things that only you can do, and I think that's probably an important thing that you should do. But after that, it should all be a discussion.
It is, wouldn't you agree, so incumbent on the male leaders at these companies to show it.
It is vital.
When we had our daughter, my husband took a month maternity leave, which was way more than anyone else that he was working around. Now his firm has 4 months paternity leave, so I'm telling him he's taking 4 the next time.
The next time around.
But you know why? I sat down with him and I said, why did you do this? How did you make this decision? His CEO at the first bank he worked at in Minneapolis, John Taft, in the 1980s,
did the same thing.
When he was an investment banker, took 3 months unpaid paternity leave twice.
Yeah.
And guess what? It hurt his career so much that he became CEO.
Yeah.
He opened a door for my husband when my husband was a kid, and 30 years later, my
and
husband
this is the
walked
part
through
that
it.
you're so right. Like I said, this dialogue is so active today. I mean, about women representation, about balancing, about balance, about equity and equality, that so it's not only the CEOs, the men have to say something like, hey, I have a baby. My wife is having a baby next week. Guess what? This is not a one-person job.
Yeah.
This is a 2-person job, and I have to actually be more engaged, so I have to take some time, so on and so on. It's a really big deal. So companies have to have an ear that can listen to it, but individuals have to take some control about this. This is not indentured servitude. Literally, you work for a company that you want to work for. If they tell you that they won't give you leave, quit and find another place that will. And by the way, and structure it. Most of the time they will. Most companies are looking for talent so aggressively that they're not dense enough to believe they're going to take a talented woman or man and say, because they had a baby, which is the thing that we do in this world to kind of keep it going, because you did that, we're going to actually punish you and not allow you, the baby's going to raise itself. Own it, and you have to
take it.
and push for it as you go up. Men and women. It's not the burden of only women to do that. Men and women, and definitely companies.
Questions? So many. Right here, Lee Gallagher from Fortune.
Hey, Lee.
Come on, stand up.
You said that, Ursula, that not having kids was one of a few really big regrets, but you said you had only a few really, really big regrets. What's another one?
Well, I had kids. I have 2 kids. So not having more
Yeah.
it was a big regret. They would be interesting to hear that they were not my kids, by the way. I keep threatening to disown them. But the second one is that My mother was really sick she died when I was 25. She was very, very ill, and she was in the hospital for 8 days before she died, and we didn't even know that she was really sick. But the night that she died, I left the hospital, and I knew something was going to happen. This is one of these things that it wouldn't have changed the outcome, but this is instincts. And I've learned from that point on, and I'm not going to cry, that there are these things that are not mathematical. They're not logical. You can't understand why, but they're so strong in you. When that happens, do not turn left or right, follow it, right? And I remember sitting there saying, I was so unsettled that I couldn't stay, so I left. And she would have died anyway, but she would have had me there, and that was a big problem. It was a big regret. Most of the other regrets that I have are having to do with people at work. People. And this is back to certain things that you can't understand why you feel it that way, and you have these hopes sometimes that, I always say this, sometimes people can't lead or aren't great at what they're doing, and I have this eternal optimism that we can train them, we'll give them a coach, we can give them an X or a Y or a Z, and generally my instincts about people generally are right early. And that early instinct about people, I try not to act on, and I always win in not acting, and I always lose because I was probably right. I should have done it in the first place.
We have one question here from Steve Melton from the Boys and Girls Club, and then ladies, students, we talked about this. I know, I'm coming to you next. Yes.
Good morning, Steve Melton, Madison Square Boys and Girls Club, and thank you for the invite, Poppy. This has been informative and inspiring. Yeah. Ursula, my question to you is, Stan and I work with young people from challenging situations around New York City, and what we see the biggest challenge with them is changing their psyche to believe that they can succeed after so many years of having challenges. So I heard you say earlier that you had these 3 strikes against you that someone said you had anyone, being black, poor, and being a woman. I'm interested to know, at what point did it become transformative for you, where that no longer became an issue, or you saw it no longer as an issue, and you were able to get beyond it? How did that happen? At
Cathedral High School. My high school was, I have this fortunate life, kind of stumbling into good situations, really. What the hell do I know about Cathedral High School? I went to Most Holy Redeemer grade school, and it's a tradition in grade schools, in Catholic grade schools, that you go to Catholic high school, and at that time they had a lot of segregated high schools, men and women. Going there in 9th grade, so I was, from 8th to 9th grade, there were a whole bunch of 3-strike people around me. There were some white people, but generally it was Hispanics and blacks or first-generation American whites in the school, all poor, all women, and there was a community of sameness with the desire to move forward. You know what I mean? It was, we didn't sit around and say we're going to be CEOs. None of that. It was just, we were all in school. We were all competing for a very positive, against each other a lot of the times, for a very positive outcome. So Cathedral was the first place that, outside of my home, that reinforced that for me, that there was a possibility that these 3 strikes, because I think poverty is a strike, but gender and race, they can't be a strike. That 2 of these strikes were not strikes at all. And so I fortunately happened into a great place. I didn't even really know it that much until I was probably a junior and senior in high school, where it became clear that we were a crew. We were hanging out, we were traveling around the city. We kind of knew we were not afraid. We knew that the world was out there for us, and it was pretty cool. And that was a good thing, and that's one of the reasons why I had been separated from Cathedral for a long time. You go to high school, the Cathedral is a typical Catholic school. They don't do good fundraising, now they're getting better at it.
I was just going to say, I hear from my school all the time.
Yeah, no, it didn't. It was not a new thing. And part of it is that it became necessary for the school to do fundraising, because, as you know, the Catholic Church is pulling away funding from some of the schools for a lot of other reasons. And so they had to start reaching out to alumni. And it's interesting. Cathedral High School is on 56th Street and First Avenue. And my first "you have arrived" gesture, this is what people said "you have arrived," is my husband and I bought an apartment in Manhattan. We were living in upstate New York. And my kids had decided, in Rochester, New York, my kids had decided that you guys are going to live there they're going to figure out a way to get to New York City or Boston or something. And so we bought a place on 51st and First. And I literally buy an apartment on 51st and First, small one, nothing too grand. And we stay there, and I walk up the street, and I'm walking right by my high school, 5 blocks away and I'm like, wow, I went to school here. And that was the first time that I actually knocked on a door in the very beginning and went back. But then there was a whole bunch of ebbs and flows, and now the school is really engaged. The principal
Right there. So
is really engaged and trying to get me back. And Dalton is here, and Cathedral is great because Cathedral is what I would call a typical gateway school. It's a phenomenal base education. You learn to read, you learn to write, you learn to do arithmetic, you learn manners, you learn discipline, you learn math and all that other stuff too. But those things that I talked about, the reading, the writing, the arithmetic, the discipline, how you should look, how you should present yourself, how do you actually speak, fundamental things that a lot of schools are not teaching anymore. You learn that there, and then you also have the opportunity, particularly if we continue to help the school and continue to get money to do tech things. They have a maker's lab, a whole bunch of things that they're moving up, which is great. Dalton is on the other end of the spectrum. We sold the first apartment and bought a different apartment, a bigger one, right up the street from Dalton. I don't know a thing about Dalton.
I know it's hard to get into.
Yeah, Cathedral is too, by the way.
School,
Cathedral is a great school, hard to get into. There's poorer people in the two schools. But someone, a colleague of mine who's on the board of Cornell Tech with me, asked me to go speak at Dalton because his daughter had done some project about me. And I was like, I get asked to speak at all of these places all the time, and it's a pain in the rear end. But if it's right up the street, it's kind of hard to say no, particularly if you're going to see the guy forever, right? Yeah. And so I went, and it was really cool. It's a great school. The women led this thing. It was Bit by Bit, I think it was called, Bit by Bit.
Conference.
Yeah, it was a conference that they put on, and it was really cool. So I'm planning to stay even more connected to Dalton as well.
So before we wrap up, let's go to the students. Who has a question for Ursula? Who is going to be the next Ursula? Tell us your name. And
Acacia Palmer. I go to Cathedral.
what grade are you in?
I'll be a rising senior in the fall.
Congrats.
Good morning. So, being a minority and a female woman, you said that your mother pushed you to succeed. What advice would you have for children out there in the world without people pushing for their success, or who are in the most unfortunate situations? Where should they start?
Yeah, I tell you, this is another one of these. This is, why don't you go into politics? I struggle with this. So I struggle with this problem, because I did have an unbelievable advantage. I had this not typical parent. One, she didn't even have a husband around. And she was, like I said, maniacal. And she had the ability to kind of do it all. Because sometimes you have maniacal parents who literally just are so busy. They work 3 jobs, they can't. So I say, find a friend. I say this over and over again. Find a friend. Reach out. Go to go down the street. Go to the janitors in the building, the neighbors. Find a friend who can help you. You will be surprised at how many people will help if you ask. Particularly, you're not asking for money. You're asking for time. You're asking for a piece of their heart, a piece of their mind. Find a friend. Get engaged in things like the Boys and Girls Club. Find structures. Now, I'm saying this to somebody who's 7 or 8 years old who has no support. How does that happen? So then what we have to do is reach out. We have to continue to go to places and just say, you can find a friend, and keep pushing it that way. It is a hard problem because the question that was asked about by the person from the Boys and Girls Club, the Boys Club, I guess it is. It's not the Boys. It is Boys and Girls Club. Boys and Girls Club. The Boys and Girls Club is the foundation of the answer to that question is that they're in the Boys and Girls Club. That's like hit number one. And we have to just continue to parlay it. It doesn't always take money. We did not have money. I got to make sure. I mean, money was not a part of the solution in my household. And if it were a part of the solution, we would have failed. Because we had examples and this positive perseverance. My mother particularly, this positive perseverance, and she was not afraid to ask, and she was not afraid to teach us to ask. I'm going to give you one side story because I know we have to end. My mother would clean offices. My mother was what she did was she was a child care worker. This was a program put on by the city where middle-class parents would give their kids during the day to a house, and we took care of them. It was called family daycare. So we had 3 family daycare kids, and it was totally fine. So we always had kids around. We had 4. We were certified for 4. It was not that great paying a job, but that's fine. But to make things kind of match, she would also do like side jobs. She would clean offices. And one of the offices she cleaned was the office of a dentist named a doctor called Dr. Gertstein. I remember him, he was on 3rd Street. And so she would clean the office, and we would get like free aspirin, this kind of stuff. I remember one day and we would have to go with my mother, certain times wouldn't leave us home alone. When we got a little bit older, she would leave us home alone, but otherwise we were with her. So we'd have to go and sit in Dr. Gerstein's office and literally not move, because you couldn't walk around, because, that was it. So we sit there. And so one day he was in the office, and I was leaving, and he said, take this. It was like some medicine. I think you'd probably be arrested now if you did this, but with some drugs. And I said, oh, no, thank you. We got out. My mother said to me, never say no thank you when somebody's offering you something. You say, you take it. Thank you and take it. Because her thing was, we are not too proud to beg here. And this guy was going to give us, I didn't even know what the hell it was. And I said, no, thank you. My mother actually did go back and ask him for the stuff, and we actually ended up getting it. And it taught me that if you seem reasonable, asking for help is not a bad thing, and people are very willing to give it, very willing. And we have kind of, that's why I started out, language is very important here. And one of the things that's the most disappointing in the last 12 months in politics was the discourse was so damning and negative, by both sides, right? But so damning and negative in like large numbers, like these people, X, Y, Z. And I didn't think that it would make a big difference. You wouldn't think that it made a big difference, but I said this way before the current discourse, this 3-strike thing stuck with me for a long time. A long time.
I know you have given us.
And so I did it with revenge now. It was the 2-strike, all 3 have been debunked.
It's a good motivator, but not something you should have ever had to hear.
Never, right. And like I said, I had a maniacal mother.
There you go.
Loving maniacal mother, but.
I think you've given us all a mission that we can leave here with. Find a person, one person. You have time. Don't go out to dinner one night and take that kid to the movie instead. That is our mission that we take seriously.
One person.
I was getting ready for this interview, and I have a bunch of pictures on my, the board next to my computer, and a bunch of Post-its with things people have said that I aspire to. And one of them is you from like 4 years ago, because this has moved offices with me. And you said the world can happen to you, or you can happen to the world, and you have happened to this world, and you have changed it for so many people.
Thank you.
And your mother would be incredibly proud. Ursula Burns, thank you.
Thank you.